Peace be upon you. God willing, today we're going to talk about a cartoon. It's a cartoon I used to watch when I was growing up, and the cartoon was the Coyote and the Roadrunner. And for those who aren't familiar with the cartoon, basically the premise is pretty straightforward. There is the wily Coyote, and he is on a continuous mission to catch, kill, and eat the Roadrunner. So he will constantly go through all kind of these elaborate Rube Goldberg kind of contraptions, typically involving dynamite and elaborate traps and all kinds of clever tricks. And no matter what he does, he always fails. And he doesn't only fail, but every single attempt he makes ends up completely backfiring and affecting himself. And I was thinking about the similarities between this cartoon and life. And surprisingly, there's a lot of commonality between the two, and it's might not be so apparent from the start. But in life, we have to understand that God is doing absolutely everything. And when God makes a promise, God's promise is, for all practical, is completely 100% utterly true. Just like the physical laws that God created, like the law of gravity, when God promises something, when God, basically swears by something, we know that it's absolutely 100% accurate. And one of the promises that God makes is that the believers will be the ultimate victors, and that the disbelievers are basically going to be the losers. And it doesn't matter what the disbeliever does or how elaborate of a scheme he thinks he's cooking up. The disbeliever's attempts are going to be futile, and if anything, it's going to backfire in themselves. And if you look at the example of the cartoon, The Coyote and the Roadrunner, it doesn't matter how clever, how cunning, how elaborate the coyote attempts to be. It's guaranteed that anything he does, it's going to fail. And why is that? It's because the creator of the cartoon, Chuck Jones, in this scenario is dictating the outcome. And he's guaranteed that the coyote will fail no matter what he does, and the Roadrunner will be successful. And it's obvious when we're watching a cartoon that that's going to be the outcome, but life is no different. God has already dictated that the believers are going to be victorious, that the disbelievers are going to fail. And some of the verses, it's funny, when you read these verses in the Quran, you realize that it's not much different. Obviously, the cartoon's lighthearted, but the overall principle is one and the same. So if you look at, for instance, let's pull up one of these, 35:43, it reads, "They resorted to arrogance on earth and evil scheming. The evil schemes only backfire on those who scheme them. Should they then expect anything but the fate of those who did the same things in the past? You'll find that God's system is never changeable. You'll find that God's system is immutable." I mean, literally, you can take this verse and apply it to the Coyote and the Roadrunner, and it still holds true. No matter what the disbelievers do, their evil schemes only backfire on those who scheme them. And it says God's system is never changeable. You'll find that God's system is immutable. And this is the system in this world. Another verse is in 48:6. It reads, "And he will requite the hypocrite men and women and the idol-worshipping men and women, for they have harbored evil thoughts about God. Their evil will backfire against them, for God is angry at them, condemns them, and has prepared for them Gehenna. What a miserable destiny. To God belongs all the forces in the heavens and the earth. God is almighty, most wise." And just like Chuck Jones controls everything that happens within that cartoon of the Coyote and the Roadrunner, he's dictating the all the ways that the Coyote's attempts are going to completely backfire in his face. That he's going to be trying to run the Roadrunner off a cliff, and as opposed to the Roadrunner going off the cliff, it's the Coyote that's going to fall off the cliff. And if you haven't seen it, just go on YouTube, type in the Coyote and the Roadrunner, watch a few episodes. And if it's been a while, again, watch it and think about how these parables apply to this life. And 52:42 reads, "Are they plotting and scheming? The disbeliever schemes backfire against them." And you see this consistently, that the disbeliever in this life is going to consistently try to go against the believer, and everything that they do is going to utterly fail. I mean, a perfect example of this is Satan, right? Satan made a vow that he's going to do everything in his power to send the believers astray, to show God that most human beings are unappreciative, and he's going to be successful against those who are wishy-washy, obviously the people who aren't absolutely 100% devoted to God alone. But against the believer, it's going to be completely a backfire in his face. And a perfect example of this is in 8:48. It says, "The devil had adorned their works in their eyes and said, 'You cannot be defeated by any people today, and I will be fighting along with you.' But as soon as the two armies faced each other, he turned back on his heels and fled, saying, 'I disown you. I see what you do not see. I'm afraid of God. God's retribution is awesome.'" And you see here that, I mean, the devil is going up, pumping up his troops, in essence, the disbelievers. And when it came down to it, he completely flees on them and abandons them because he sees the consequences of his what's in store. Now, similarly, I mean, all these attempts, all these plots that the devil's scheming for the believers, it all backfires to him because he ultimately ends up in hell for all of eternity. But it's so much more than just this principle that whatever schemes they come out with, that it just backfires. You have to ask yourself, what is it that allows the coyote, no matter what he does, to fail? And the reason is because the creator of this cartoon is dictating the outcome, right? And because of this, it doesn't matter how much of how cunning, how clever the coyote is, it's utterly all useless. It's all gonna fail. And it's a perfect example of this is in 13:39 through 42. It reads, "God erases whatever he wills and fixes whatever he wills. With him is the original master record." Now you think of the concept of erases whatever he wills and fixes whatever he wills, and apply that to the concept of a cartoon. And in the cartoon, Chuck Jones can erase whatever he wants, fix whatever he wants, and it doesn't matter how ahead the coyote planned for this scheme. Ultimately, the creator of that cartoon, just like the creator of this world, this universe, is the one who's in absolute control of what happens. And in 1340, it reads, "Whether we show you what we promised them or terminate your life before that, your sole mission is to deliver the message. It is us who will call them to account. Do they not see that every day on earth brings them closer to the end, and that God decides their lifespan irrevocably? He is the most efficient reckoner. Others before them have schemed, but to God belongs the ultimate scheming. He knows what everyone is doing. The disbelievers will find out who the ultimate winners are." I just want to emphasize in 42, it says, "Others before them have schemed, but to God belongs the ultimate scheming." So it doesn't matter kind of what they do, what they kind of elaborate tricks the coyote comes up with, or the disbeliever, or the devil. If we are in God's graces, none of this is ever going to harm us. And it continues on 57, 22, and 23. It says, "Anything that happens on earth or to you has already been recorded even before the creation. This is easy for God to do. Thus you should not grieve over anything you miss, nor be proud of anything he has bestowed upon you. God does not love those who are boastful, proud." And even before our creation, God already knew what was going to take place, and God has already planned for that event. And there's nothing, I mean, in essence, that we need to worry about, anything that we need to be upset about. And in The Alchemist, the book, there's a quote I pulled. It reads, "We are afraid of losing what we have, whether it's our life or our possessions or our property. But this fear evaporates when we understand that our life stories and the history of the world were written by the same hand." And this world, this life that you live, was written by the hand of God. The people you're going to encounter, the events that are going to take place, the traffic that you run into, was all perfectly designed by God for us to be able to grow and learn from. And we have this tendency that, we worry. We think that, as if our life story, that God has forgotten something, that God has missed something. And you realize that so much of frustration, so much of anger, so much of grief has to do with this thought that, life doesn't meet our expectations, because we've set certain expectations of what we think how these outcomes should play, that we get frustrated, we get angry. And what we don't realize is that, look, God not only sees the beginning, God sees the end and is planned accordingly. Now, if you go back and look at the example of the Roadrunner, never do you see the Roadrunner get anxious, get afraid, think that, oh no, the coyotes got me this time, I'm done for. You see this attitude of just complete, upbeat, happy, beep beep. And that's how we need to be in life. That if we're doing what God expects from us, that we should be able to take everything in stride. We should cheerfully submit to God and cheerfully submit to any outcome that is presented before us, because we realize that God is the one who's basically controlling the beginning and the end and everything in between. There's nothing that happens in this world that is outside of God's control. And if we realize that, we'll be a lot more content in our life, and we'll be a lot more at ease. And all this worry, all this frustration that we experience on a day-to-day basis will just evaporate. Think of this. Every single event that you've ever worried about, that you ever feared, ended up really not mattering at the end of the day, because you are here right now, right? You've gone through all of that and you're absolutely fine. And this is the way that life is that God knows exactly how much we can bear, and God knows exactly how much we can take. And if we absolutely submit wholeheartedly to God's will, not only will God allow us to persevere through this, He'll allow us to grow from these situations. And in 16:1 it reads, God's command has already been issued and everything has already been written, so do not rush it. Be He glorified most high, far above the idols they set up. So you hear it again here, that God's command has already been issued and everything has already been written. It's already dictated as far as what's going to happen, how the situation is going to play out. And because of this, we have absolute certainty in God, that God has planned for us, that God has the best intentions in mind. If we basically uphold our part of the promise, there's no doubt that God will uphold His part of the promise of perfect health, perfect wealth, perfect happiness. And we see an example of this in 842. The header says, God controls everything and plans for the believers. Recall that you were on the side of the valley while they were on the other side. Then their caravan had to move to lower ground. Had you planned it this way, you could not have done it. But God was to carry out a predetermined matter, whereby those destined to be annihilated were annihilated for an obvious reason, and those destined to be saved were saved for an obvious reason. God is forgiver, omniscient. And here we have an example of, the Prophet Muhammad and the believers having to go to war. And during this time, God fixed the situation that the believers would have the upper hand. And this wasn't something that they could have planned for, that they, could have been so clever to come up with. This was because God allocated that event to transpire in this particular manner to get a particular outcome. And we see consistently, that if we are in God's grace, if we abide by God's laws, we're guaranteed to be the ultimate victors. And a couple verses is like in 3:139, it reads, You shall not waver, nor shall you grieve, for you are the ultimate victors if you are believers. 6:135, Say, O my people, do your best, and so will I. You will surely find out who the ultimate victors are. Certainly the wicked will never succeed. 11:49, This is news from the past that we revealed to you. You had no knowledge about them, neither you nor the people before this. Therefore be patient. The ultimate victory belongs to the righteous. So this kind of takes us to another point. It's in regards to this concept of predestination, right? If God already knows everything that happens, God has already planned for the believers, then do we have true free will? And the reality of it is, it's in Appendix 16 of the Quran. And in Appendix 16, we learn from 5722 that our lives, along with everything else around us, are pre-recorded on something like, a videotape, or basically it's a master record of our lives. And God knows exactly what direction, what outcome we're going to basically pursue. But God allows us to go through this life to see for ourselves the decisions we've made. Now, when we come to a decision, the possibilities are far and wide. But God knows which one we're going to converge upon and which reality is going to come to be. And up until that point when a decision is presented before us, it's up to us which route we choose. And an example of this is in, pull it up really quick, in chapter 2044. So God is telling Moses when he goes to Pharaoh to speak to him nicely. He may take heed or become reverent. My takeaway from this is that at that moment when Moses gave the message to Pharaoh, Pharaoh had the opportunity to believe, and that decision was available to him. Yet God knew that Pharaoh would not believe and would continue to be a tyrant on earth. And again, we see a similar example in in 21:46, it reads, "When a sample of your Lord's retribution afflicts them, they readily say, 'We were indeed wicked.'" And it's at that moment that they have the opportunity to change and reform. But most people opt not to. And another example in the same chapter in 21 from 58 through 65, it's the example of Abraham. And Abraham basically broke the idols that the people were worshiping into pieces, except for a big one, that they may refer to it. So the people said, "Whoever did this to our gods is really a transgressor." They said, "We heard a youth threaten them. He is called Abraham." They said, "Bring him before the eyes of all the people that they may bear witness." They said, "Did you do this to our gods, O Abraham?" Abraham proves his point. 21:63 says, he said, "It is that big one who did it. Go ask them if they can speak." They were taken aback and said to themselves, "Indeed, you are the ones who have been transgressing." Yet they reverted to the old ideas. You know full well that these cannot speak. And it was at that point in 21:64 when Abraham proves his point that the people reflect on themselves and say to themselves, indeed, they were the ones who have been transgressing. Yet they revert, that they go back to their old mentality. And the way I see this is that they had the opportunity at this moment to repent, reflect, basically get back on the path, and they opted not to. And that's how I understand as far as this merge between free will versus predestination. As far as God is concerned, everything is already written. Everything is already recorded. God knows the outcome of every single individual. God knows who's going to heaven, who's going to hell. The difference is we don't know that. And God is allowing us to go through this experiment to see everything for ourselves, why we made the decisions we made. And even though we're open to make any decision, God knows exactly which one we're going to converge on and what the outcome is going to be. At this point, just kind of to touch base back with the Coyote and the Roadrunner, there's so much that we can learn from just these simple examples. My thought is everything that happens in our life, everything that we engage with, every interaction we have, there's a lesson to be learned, and there's some information we can pull out of it. And something as simple as the Coyote and the Roadrunner, I see, God is giving me personally an example, and God willing, maybe you guys can benefit from that as well. It's kind of lighthearted in topic, but still nevertheless a great way to kind of reflect and inshallah grow our souls. God willing, I'm going to finish by reading one verse in chapter 10, verse 61. The header is Knowing God. It says, "You do not get into any situation, nor do you recite any Quran, nor do you do anything without us being witnesses thereof, as you do it. Not even an atom's weight is out of your Lord's control, be it in the heavens or the earth, nor is there anything smaller than an atom or larger that is not recorded in a profound record." God willing, going to end there. If you got any questions or if you got any comments, feel free to send us a note at QuranTalk@gmail.com, and feel free to give us a rating on iTunes, so God willing we can move up the ranks. Until next time, peace and God bless.